Consequences by Willa Cather. Henry Eastman, a lawyer, aged 40, was standing beside the Flatiron Building in a driving November rainstorm, signaling frantically for a taxi. It was 6:30 and everything on wheels was engaged. The streets were in confusion about him, the sky was in turmoil above him, and the Flatiron Building, which seemed about to blow down, threw water like a mill chute. Suddenly, out of the brutal struggle of men and cars and machines and people tilting at each other with umbrellas, a quiet, well-mannered limousine paused before him at the curb, and an agreeable, ruddy countenance confronted him through the open window of the car. "Don't you want me to pick you up, Mr. Eastman? I'm running directly home now." Eastman recognized Keir Kavanaugh, a young man of pleasure who lived in the house on Central Park South, where he himself had an apartment. "Don't I?" he exclaimed, bolting into the car. "I'll risk getting your cushions wet without compunction. I came up in a taxi, but I didn't hold it. Bad economy. I thought I saw your car down on 14th Street about half an hour ago." The owner of the car smiled. He had a pleasant round face and round eyes, and a fringe of smooth yellow hair showed under the rim of his soft felt hat. "With a lot of little broilers fluttering into it?" "You did. I know some girls who work in the cheap shops down there. I happened to be downtown, and I stopped and took a load of them home. I do sometimes. Save their poor little clothes, you know. Their shoes are never any good." Eastman looked at his rescuer. "Aren't they notoriously afraid of cars and smooth young men?" he inquired. Kavanaugh shook his head. "They know which cars are safe and which are chancy. They put each other wise. You have to take a bunch at a time, of course. The Italian girls can never come along. Their men shoot. The girls understand all right, but their fathers don't. One gets to see queer places sometimes, taking them home." Eastman laughed dryly. "Every time I touch the circle of your acquaintance, Kavanaugh, it's a little wider. You must know New York pretty well by this time." "Yes, but I'm on my good behavior before 23rd Street, the young man replied with simplicity. "My little friends down there would give me a good character. They're wise little girls. They have grand ways with each other, a romantic code of loyalty. You can find a good many of the lost virtues among them." The car was standing still in a traffic block at 40th Street when Kavanaugh suddenly drew his face away from the window and touched Eastman's arm. "Look, please. You see that hansom with the bony gray horse? Driver has a broken hat and red flannel around his throat. Can you see who's inside?" Eastman peered out. The hansom was just cutting across the line, and the driver was making a great fuss about it, bobbing his head and waving his whip. He jerked his dripping old horse into 40th Street and clattered off past the public library grounds toward 6th Avenue. "No, I couldn't see the passenger. Someone you know?" "Could you see whether there was a passenger?" Kavanaugh asked. "Why, yes, a man, I think. I saw his elbow on the apron. No driver ever behaves like that unless he has a passenger." "Yes, I may have been mistaken," Kavanaugh murmured absent-mindedly. 10 minutes or so later, after Kavanaugh's car had turned off 5th Avenue into 58th Street, Eastman exclaimed, "There's your same cabbie, and his cart's empty. He's headed for a drink now, I suppose." The driver in the broken hat and the red flannel neckcloth was still brandishing the whip over his old gray. He was coming from the west now and turned down 6th Avenue under the elevated. Kavanaugh's car stopped at the bachelor apartment house between 6th and 7th Avenues, where he and Eastman lived, and they went up in the elevator together. They were still talking when the lift stopped at Kavanaugh's floor, and Eastman stepped out with him and walked down the hall, finishing his sentence while Kavanaugh found his latchkey. When he opened the door, a wave of fresh cigarette smoke greeted them. Kavanaugh stopped short and stared into his hallway. "Now, how in the devil?" he exclaimed angrily. "Someone waiting for you?" "Oh, no thanks. I wasn't coming in. I have to work tonight. Thank you, but I couldn't." Eastman nodded and went up the 2 flights to his own rooms. Though Eastman did not customarily keep a servant, he had this winter a man who had been lent to him by a friend who was abroad. Rollins met him at the door and took his coat and hat. "Put up my dinner clothes, Rollins, and then get out of here until 10 o'clock. I've promised to go to a supper tonight. I shan't be dining. I've had a late tea, and I'm going to work until 10. You may put out some kummis and biscuit for me." Rollins took himself off, and Eastman settled down at the big table in the sitting room. He had to read a lot of letters submitted as evidence in a breach of one contract case, and before he got very far he found that long paragraphs in some of the letters were written in German. He had a German dictionary at his office, but none here. Rollins had gone, and anyhow the bookstores would be closed. He remembered having seen a row of dictionaries on the lower shelf of one of Kavanaugh's bookcases. Kavanaugh had a lot of books, though he never read anything but new stuff. Eastman prudently turned down his student's lamp very low, the thing had an evil habit of smoking, and went down 2 flights to Kavanaugh's door. The young man himself answered Eastman's ring. He was freshly dressed for the evening, except for a brown smoking jacket, and his yellow hair had been brushed until it shone. He hesitated as he confronted his caller, still holding the doorknob, and his round eyes and smooth forehead made their best imitation of a frown. When Eastman began to apologize, Kavanaugh's manner suddenly changed. He caught his arm and jerked him into the narrow hall. Come in, right along," he said excitedly. "Right along," he repeated as he pushed Eastman before him into his sitting room. "Well, I'll—" He stopped short at the door and looked about his own room with an air of complete mystification. The back window was wide open, and a strong wind was blowing in. Kavanaugh walked over to the window and stuck out his head, looking up and down the fire escape. When he pulled his head in, he drew down the sash. "I had a visitor I wanted you to see," he explained with a nervous smile. "At least I thought I had. He must have gone out that way," nodding toward the window. "Call him back. I only came to borrow a German dictionary, if you have one. Can't stay. Call him back." Kavanaugh shook his head despondently. "No use. He's beat it. Nowhere in sight." "He must be active. Has he left something?" Eastman pointed to a very dirty white glove that lay on the floor under the window. "Yes, that's his." Kavanaugh reached for his tongs, picked up the glove, and tossed it into the grate, where it quickly shriveled on the coals. Eastman felt that he had happened in upon something disagreeable, possibly something shady, and he wanted to get away at once. Kavanaugh stood staring at the fire and seemed stupid and dazed, so he repeated his request rather sternly. "I think I've seen a German dictionary down there among your books. May I have it?" Kavanaugh blinked at him. "A German dictionary? Oh, possibly. Those were my father's. I scarcely know what there is." He put down the tongs and began to wipe his hands nervously with his handkerchief. Eastman went over to the bookcase behind the Chesterfield, opened the door, swooped upon the book he wanted, and stuck it under his arm. He felt perfectly certain now that something shady had been going on in Kavanaugh's rooms, and he saw no reason why he should come in for any hangover. "Thanks, I'll send it back tomorrow," he said curtly as he made for the door. Kavanaugh followed him. "Wait a moment. I wanted you to see him. You did see his glove," glancing at the grate. Eastman laughed disagreeably. "I saw a glove. That's not evidence. Do your friends often use that means of exit? Somewhat inconvenient." Kavanaugh gave him a startled glance. "Wouldn't you think so? For an old man, a very rickety old party. The ladders are steep, you know, and rusty." He approached the window again and put it up softly. In a moment he drew his head back with a jerk. He caught Eastman's arm and shoved him toward the window. "Hurry, please, look! Down there!" He pointed to the little patch of paved court 4 flights down. The square of pavement was so small and the walls about it were so high that it was a good deal like looking down a well. 4 tall buildings backed upon the same court and made a kind of shaft, with flagstones at the bottom, and at the top a square of dark blue with some stars in it. At the bottom of the shaft Eastman saw a black figure, a man in a caped coat and a tall hat stealing cautiously around, not across the square of pavement, keeping close to the dark wall and avoiding the streak of light that fell on the flagstones from a window in the opposite house. Seen from that height, he was of course foreshortened, and probably looked more shambling and decrepit than he was. He picked his way along with exaggerated care and looked like a silly old cat crossing a wet street. When he reached the gate that led into an alleyway between 2 buildings, he fell about for the latch, opened the door a mere crack, and then shot out under the feeble lamp that burned into the brick arch over the gateway. The door closed after him. "He'll get run in," Eastman remarked curtly, turning away from the window. "That door shouldn't be left unlocked. Any crook could come in. I'll speak to the janitor about it, if you don't mind," he added sarcastically. "Wish you would." Kavanaugh stood brushing down the front of his jacket, first with his right hand and then with his left. "You saw him, didn't you?" "Enough of him. Seems eccentric. I have to see a lot of buggy people. They don't take me in anymore, but I'm keeping you, and I'm in a hurry myself. Good night." Kavanaugh put out his hand detainingly and started to say something, but Eastman rudely turned his back and went down the hall and out of the door. He had never felt anything shady about Kavanaugh before, and he was sorry he had gone down for the dictionary. In 5 minutes he was deep in his papers. But in the half hour when he was loafing before he dressed to go out, the young man's curious behavior came into his mind again. Eastman had merely a neighborly acquaintance with Kavanaugh. He had been to a supper at the young man's rooms once, but he didn't particularly like Kavanaugh's friends, so the next time he was asked, he had another engagement. He liked Kavanaugh himself, if for nothing else than because he was so cheerful and trim and ruddy. A good complexion is always at a premium in New York, especially when it shines reassuringly on a man who does everything in the world to lose it. It encourages fellow mortals as to the inherent vigor of the human organism and the amount of bad treatment it will stand for. Footprints, that perhaps another, etc. Kavanaugh, he knew, had plenty of money. He was the son of a Pennsylvania preacher who died soon after he discovered that his ancestral acres were full of petroleum, and Keir had come to New York to burn some of the oil. He was 32 and was still at it, spent his life literally among the breakers. His motor hit the park every morning as if it were the first time ever. He took people out to supper every night. He went from restaurant to restaurant, sometimes to half a dozen in an evening. The head waiters were his hosts, and their cordiality made him happy. They made a lifeline for him up Broadway and down Fifth Avenue. Kavanaugh was still fresh and smooth, round and plump, with a luster to his hair, and white teeth and a clear look in his round eyes. He seemed absolutely unwearied and unimpaired, never bored and never carried away. Eastman always smiled when he met Kavanaugh in the entrance hall, serenely going forth to or returning from gladiatorial combats with joy, or when he saw him rolling smoothly up to the door in his car in the morning after a restful night in one of the remarkable new roadhouses he was always finding. Eastman had seen a good many young men disappear on Kavanaugh's route, and he admired this young man's endurance. Tonight, for the first time, he had got a whiff of something unwholesome about the fellow. Bad nerves, bad company, something on hand that he was ashamed of. A visitor old and vicious who must have had a key to Kavanaugh's apartment, for he was evidently there when Kavanaugh returned at 7 o'clock. Probably it was the same man Kavanaugh had seen in the hansom. He must have been able to let himself in, for Kavanaugh kept no man but his chauffeur, or perhaps the janitor had been instructed to let him in. In either case, and whoever he was, it was clear enough that Kavanaugh was ashamed of him and was mixing up in questionable business of some kind. Eastman sent Kavanaugh's book back to Rollins, and for the next few weeks he had no word with him beyond a casual greeting when they happened to meet in the hall or the elevator. One Sunday morning, Kavanaugh telephoned up to him and asked if he could motor out to a roadhouse in Connecticut that afternoon and have supper. But when Eastman found there were to be other guests, he declined. On New Year's Eve, Eastman dined at the University Club at 6 o'clock and hurried home before the usual manifestations of insanity had begun in the streets. When Rollin brought his smoking coat, he asked him whether he would like to get off early. Yes, sir, but won't you be dressing, Mr. Eastman? He inquired. Not tonight. Eastman handed him a bill. Bring some change in the morning. There'll be fees. Rollins lost no time in putting everything to rights for the night, and Eastman couldn't help wishing that he were in such a hurry to be off somewhere himself. When he heard the hall door close softly, he wondered if there were any place, after all, that he wanted to go. From his window, he looked down at the long lines of motors and taxis waiting for a signal to cross Broadway. He thought of some of their probable destinations and decided that none of those places pulled him very hard. The night was warm and wet, the air was drizzly. Vapor hung in clouds about the Times building, half hid the top of it and made a luminous haze along Broadway. While he was looking down at the army of wet black carriage tops in their reflected headlights and taillights, Eastman heard a ring at his door. He deliberated. If it were a caller, the hall porter would have telephoned up. It must be the janitor. When he opened the door, there stood a rosy young man in a tuxedo without a coat or hat. Pardon, should I have telephoned? I half thought you wouldn't be in. Eastman laughed. Come in, Kavanaugh. You weren't sure whether you wanted company or not, eh? And you were trying to let chance decide it. That was exactly my state of mind. Let's accept the verdict. When they emerged from the narrow hall into his sitting room, he pointed out a seat by the fire to his guest. He brought a tray of decanters and soda bottles and placed it on his writing table. Kavanaugh hesitated, standing by the fire. Sure you weren't starting for somewhere? Do I look it? No, I was just making up my mind to stick it out alone when you rang. Have one? He picked up a tall tumbler. Yes, thank you. I always do. Eastman chuckled. Lucky boy. So will I. I had a very early dinner. New York is the most arid place on holidays. He continued as he rattled the ice in the glasses. When one gets too old to hit the rapids down there and tired of gobbling food to heathenish dance music, there's absolutely no place where you can get a chop and some milk toast in peace, unless you have strong ties of blood brotherhood on Upper Fifth Avenue. But you, why aren't you starting for somewhere? The young man sipped his soda and shook his head as he replied, "Oh, I couldn't get a chop either. I know only flashy people, of course." He looked up at his host with such a grave and candid expression that Eastman decided there couldn't be anything very crooked about the fellow. His smooth cheeks were positively cherubic. "Well, what's the matter with them? Aren't they flashing out tonight?" "Only the very new ones seem to flash on New Year's Eve. The older ones fade away. Maybe they are hunting a chop, too." "Well," Eastman sat down, "holidays do dash one. I was just about to write a letter to a pair of maiden aunts in my old hometown upstate. Old coasting hill, snow-covered pines, lights in the church windows. That's what you saved me from." Kavanaugh shook himself. "Oh, I'm sure that wouldn't have been good for you. Pardon me." He rose and took a photograph from the bookcase, a handsome man in shooting clothes. "Dudley, isn't it? Did you know him well?" "Yes, an old friend. Terrible thing, wasn't it? I haven't got over the jolt yet." "His suicide? Yes, terrible. Did you know his wife?" "Slightly. Well, enough to admire her very much. She must be terribly broken up. I wonder Dudley didn't think of that." Kavanaugh replaced the photograph carefully, lit a cigarette, and standing before the fire began to smoke. "Would you mind telling me about him? I never met him, but of course I'd read a lot about him, and I can't help feeling interested. It was a queer thing." Eastman took out his cigar case and leaned back in his deep chair. "In the days when I knew him best, he hadn't any story, like the Happy Nations. Everything was properly arranged for him before he was born. He came into the world happy, healthy, clever, straight, with the right sort of connections and the right kind of fortune. Neither too large nor too small. He helped to make the world an agreeable place to live until he was 26. Then he married as he should have married. His wife was a Californian, educated abroad. Beautiful. You've seen her picture?" Kavanaugh nodded. "Oh, many of them." "She was interesting, too. Though she was distinctly a person of the world, she had retained something, just enough of the large Western manner. She had the habit of authority, of calling out a special train if she needed it, of using all our ingenious mechanical contrivances lightly and easily, without overrating them. She and Dudley knew how to live better than most people. Their house was the most charming one I have ever known in New York. You felt freedom there, and a zest for life and safety. Absolute sanctuary, from everything sordid or petty. A whole society like that would justify the creation of man and would make our planet shine with a soft, peculiar radiance among the constellations. You think I'm putting it on thick?" The young man sighed gently. "Oh, no. One has always felt there must be people like that. I've never known any." "They had 2 children, beautiful ones. After they had been married for 8 years, Rosina met this Spaniard. He must have amounted to something. She wasn't a flighty woman. She came home and told Dudley how matters stood. He persuaded her to stay at home for 6 months and try to pull up. They were both fair-minded people, and I'm as sure as if I were the Almighty that she did try. But at the end of the time, Rosina went quietly off to Spain, and Dudley went to hunt in the Canadian Rockies. I met his party out there. I didn't know his wife had left him and talked about her a good deal. I noticed that he never drank anything, and his light used to shine through the log chinks of his room until all hours, even after a hard day's hunting. When I got back to New York, rumors were creeping about. Dudley did not come back. He bought a ranch in Wyoming, built a big log house, and kept splendid dogs and horses. One of his sisters went out to keep house for him, and the children were there when they were not in school. He had a great many visitors, and everyone who came back talked about how well Dudley kept things going. He put in 2 years out there. Then, last month, he had to come back on business. A trust fund had to be settled up, and he was administrator. I saw him at the club. Same light, quick step, same gracious handshake. He was getting gray, and there was something softer in his manner, but he had a fine red tan on his face and said he found it delightful to be here in the season when everything is going hard. The Madison Avenue house had been closed since Rosina left it. He went there to get some things his sister wanted. That, of course, was the mistake. He went alone in the afternoon and didn't go out for dinner. Found some sherry and tins of biscuit in the sideboard. He shot himself sometime that night. There were pistols in his smoking room. They found burnt-out candles beside him in the morning. The gas and electricity were shut off. I suppose there in his own house among his own things. It was too much for him. He left no letters. Kavanaugh blinked and brushed the lapel of his coat. I suppose, he said slowly, that every suicide is logical and reasonable if one knew all the facts. Eastman roused himself. No, I don't think so. I've known too many fellows who went off like that. More than I deserve, I think. And some of them were absolutely inexplicable. I can understand Dudley. But I can't see why healthy bachelors with money enough like ourselves need such a device. It reminds me of what Dr. Johnson said, that the most discouraging thing about life is the number of fads and hobbies and fake religions it takes to put people through a few years of it. Dr. Johnson? The specialist? Oh, the old fellow, said Kavanaugh imperturbably. Yes, that's interesting. Still, I fancy if one knew the facts. Did you know about Wyatt? I don't think so. You wouldn't, probably. He was just a fellow about town who spent money. He wasn't one of the forestieri, though. Had connections here and owned a fine old place over on Staten Island. He went in for botany, and he had been all over, hunting things. Rusts, I believe. He had a yacht and used to take gay crowd down about South Seas, botanizing. He really did botanize, I believe. I never knew such a spender. Only not flashy. He helped a lot of fellows, and he was awfully good to girls. The kind who come down here to get a little fun, who don't like to work and still aren't really tough. The kind you see talking hard for their dinner. Nobody knows what becomes of them or what they get out of it, and there are hundreds of new ones every year. He helped dozens of them, and it was he who got me curious about the little shop girls. Well, one afternoon when his tea was brought, he took prussic acid instead. He didn't leave any letters either. People of any taste don't. They wouldn't leave any material reminder if they could help it. His lawyers found that he had $314.72 above his debts when he died. He had planned to spend all his money and then take his tea. He had worked it out carefully. Eastman reached for his pipe and pushed his chair away from the fire. That looks like a considered case, but I don't think philosophical suicides like that are common. I think they usually come from stress of feeling, and are really, as the newspapers call them, desperate acts, done without a motive. You remember when Anna Karenina was under the wheels? She kept saying, "Why am I here?" Kavanaugh rubbed his upper lip with his pink finger and made an effort to wrinkle his brows. "May I, please?" reaching for the whiskey. "But have you," he asked, blinking as the soda flew at him, "have you ever known yourself cases that were really inexplicable?" "A few too many. I was in Washington just before Captain Jack Purton was married, and I saw a good deal of him. Popular army man, fine record in the Philippines, married a charming girl with lots of money, mutual devotion. It was the gayest wedding of the summer, and they started for Japan. They stopped in San Francisco for a week and missed their boat because, as the bride wrote back to Washington, they were too happy to move. They took the next boat, were both good sailors, had exceptional weather. After they had been out for 2 weeks, Jack got up from his deck chair one afternoon, yawned, put down his book, and stood before his wife. "Stop reading for a moment and look at me." She laughed and asked him why. "Because you happen to be good to look at." He nodded to her, went back to the stern, and was never seen again. Must have gone down to the lower deck and slipped overboard behind the machinery. It was the luncheon hour, not many people about. Steamer cutting through a soft green sea. That's one of the most baffling cases I know. His friends raked up his past, and it was as trim as a cottage garden. If he had so much as dropped an ink spot on his fatigue uniform, they'd have found it. He wasn't emotional or moody, wasn't indeed very interesting. Simply a good soldier, fond of all the pompous little formalities that make up a military man's life. What do you make of that, my boy? Kavanaugh stroked his chin. It's very puzzling, I admit. Still, if one knew everything. But we do know everything. His friends wanted to find something to help them out, to help the girl out, to help the case of the human creature. "Oh, I don't mean things that people could unearth," said Kavanaugh uneasily. "But possibly there were things that couldn't be found out." Eastman shrugged his shoulders. It's my experience that when there are things, as you call them, they're very apt to be found. There is no such thing as a secret. To make any move at all, one has to employ human agencies. Employ at least one human agent. Even when the pirates killed the men who buried their gold for them, the bones told the story. Kavanaugh rubbed his hands together and smiled his sunny smile. I like that idea. It's reassuring. If we can have no secrets, it means that we can't, after all, go so far afield as we might. He hesitated. Yes, as we might. Eastman looked at him sourly. Kavanaugh, when you've practiced law in New York for 12 years, you find that people can't go far in any direction except... He thrust his forefinger sharply at the floor. Even in that direction, few people can do anything out of the ordinary. Our range is limited. Skip a few baths and we become personally objectionable. The slightest carelessness can rot a man's integrity or give him ptomaine poisoning. We keep up only by incessant cleansing operations of mind and body. What we call character is being held together by all sorts of tacks and strings and glue. Kavanaugh looked startled. Come now, it's not so bad as that, is it? I've always thought that a serious man like you must know a lot of Lancelots. When Eastman only laughed, the younger man squirmed about in his chair. He spoke again hastily, as if he were embarrassed. Your military friend may have had personal experiences, however, that his friends couldn't possibly get a line on. He may accidentally have come to a place where he saw himself in too unpleasant a light. I believe people can be chilled by a draft from outside somewhere. Outside? Eastman echoed. Ah, you mean the far outside. Ghosts, delusions, eh? Kavanaugh winced. That's putting it strong. Why not say tips from the outside? Delusions belong to a diseased mind, don't they? There are some of us who have no minds to speak of, who yet have had experiences. I've had a little something in that line myself, and I don't look it, do I? Eastman looked at the bland countenance turned toward him. Not exactly. What's your delusion? It's not a delusion. It's a haunt. The lawyer chuckled. Soul of a lost casino girl? No, an old gentleman. A most unattractive old gentleman who follows me about. Does he want money? Kavanaugh sat up straight. No, I wish to God he wanted anything but the pleasure of my society. I'd let him clean me out to be rid of him. He's a real article. You saw him yourself that night when you came to my rooms to borrow a dictionary and he went down the fire escape. You saw him down in the court. Well, I saw somebody down in the court, but I'm too cautious to take it for granted that I saw what you saw. Why, anyhow, should I see your haunt? If it was your friend I saw, he impressed me disagreeably. How did you pick him up? Kavanaugh looked gloomy. That was queer, too. Charlie Burke and I had motored out to Long Beach about a year ago, sometime in October, I think. We had supper and stayed until late. When we were coming home, my car broke down. We had a lot of girls along who had to get back for morning rehearsals and things, so I sent them all into town in Charlie's car, and he was to send a man back to tow me home. I was driving myself and didn't want to leave my machine. We had not taken a direct road back, so I was stuck in a lonesome, woody place, no houses about. I got chilly and made a fire, and was putting in the time comfortably enough when this old party steps up. He was in shabby evening clothes and a top hat, and had on his usual white gloves. How he got there at 3 o'clock in the morning, miles from any town or railway, I'll leave it to you to figure out. He surely had no car. When I saw him coming up to the fire, I disliked him. He had a silly, apologetic walk. His teeth were chattering, and I asked him to sit down. He got down like a clothes horse folding up. I offered him a cigarette, and when he took off his gloves, I couldn't help noticing how knotted and spotty his hands were. He was asthmatic and took his breath with a wheeze. Haven't you got anything refreshing in there? He asked, nodding at the car. When I told him I hadn't, he sighed. Ah, you young fellows are greedy. You drink it all up. You drink it all up, up. He kept chewing it over. Kavanaugh paused and looked embarrassed again. The thing that was most unpleasant is difficult to explain. The old man sat there by the fire and leered at me with a silly sort of admiration that was, well, more than humiliating. Gay boy, gay dog, he would mutter, and when he grinned he showed his teeth, worn and yellow, shells. I remembered that it was better to talk casually to insane people. So I remarked carelessly that I had been out with a party and got stuck. Oh, yes, I remember, he said, Flora and Lottie and Mabel and Marceline and poor Kate. He had named them correctly, so I began to think I had been hitting the bright waters too hard. Things I drank never had seemed to make me woody, but you can never tell when trouble is going to hit you. I pulled my hat down and tried to look as uncommunicative as possible, but he kept croaking on from time to time like this. Poor Katie, splendid arms, but nope, got her. She took up with Eastern religions after she had her hair dyed. Got to going to Swami's joint and smoking opium. Temple of the Lotus it was called, and the police raided it. This was nonsense, of course. The young woman was in the pink of condition. I let him rave, but I decided that if something didn't come out for me pretty soon, I'd foot it across Long Island. There wasn't room enough for the two of us. I got up and took another try at my car. He hopped right after me. Good car, he wheezed. Better than the little Ford. I had had a Ford before, but so was everybody. That was a safe guess. Still, he went on, that run-in from Huntington Bay in the rain wasn't bad. Arrested for speeding. It was true I had made such a run, under rather unusual circumstances, and had been arrested. When at last I heard my lifeboat snorting up the road, my visitor got up, sighed, and stepped back into the shadow of the trees. I didn't wait to see what became of him, you may believe. That was visitation number 1. What do you think of it? Kavanaugh looked at his host defiantly. Eastman smiled. I think you'd better change your mode of life, Kavanaugh. Had many returns? He inquired. Too many by far. The young man took a turn about the room and came back to the fire. Standing by the mantel, he lit another cigarette before going on with his story. The second visitation happened in the street, early in the evening, about 8 o'clock. I was held up in a traffic block before the plaza. My chauffeur was driving. Old Nibs steps up out of the crowd, opens the door of my car, and gets in and sits down beside me. He had on wilted evening clothes, same as before, and there was some sort of heavy scent about him. Such an unpleasant old party. A thoroughgoing rotter, you knew it at once. This time he wasn't talkative as he had been when I first saw him. He leaned back in the car as if he had owned it, crossed his hands on his stick, and looked out at the crowd, sort of hungrily. I own I really felt a loathing compassion for him. We got down the avenue slowly. I kept looking out at the mounted police. But what could I do? Have him pulled? I was afraid to. I was awfully afraid of getting him into the papers. I'm going to the new Astor, I said at last. Can I take you anywhere? No, thank you, says he. I get out when you do. I'm due on West 44th. I'm dining tonight with Marceline, all that is left of her. He put his hand to his hat brim with a gruesome salute. Such a scandalous, foolish old face he had. When we pulled up at the Astor, I stuck my hand in my pocket and asked him if he'd like a little loan. No, thank you, but... He leaned over and whispered, Ugh, but save a little. 40 years from now, a little comes in handy. Save a little. His eyes fairly glittered as he made his remark. I jumped out. I'd have jumped into the North River. When he tripped off, I asked my chauffeur if he'd noticed the man who got into the car with me. He said he knew someone was with me, but he hadn't noticed just when he had got in. Want to hear any more? Kavanaugh dropped into his chair again. His plump cheeks were a trifle more flushed than usual, but he was perfectly calm. Eastman felt that the young man believed what he was telling him. Of course I do. It's very interesting. I don't see quite where you are coming out, though. Kavanaugh sniffed. No more do I. I really feel that I've been put upon. I haven't deserved it any more than any other fellow of my kind. Doesn't it impress you disagreeably? Well, rather so. Has anyone else seen your friend? You saw him. We won't count that. As I said, there's no certainty that you and I saw the same person in the court that night. Has anyone else had a look in? People sense him rather than see him. He usually crops up when I'm alone or in a crowd on the street. He never approaches me when I'm with people I know, though I've seen him hanging about the doors of theaters when I come out with a party, loafing around the stage exit under a wall or across the street in a doorway. To be frank, I'm not anxious to introduce him. The third time, it was I who came upon him. In November, my driver, Harry, had a sudden attack of appendicitis. I took him to the Presbyterian hospital in the car early in the evening. When I came home, I found the old villain in my rooms. I offered him a drink and he sat down. It was the first time I had seen him in a steady light with his hat off. His face is lined like a railway map, and as to color, Lord, what a liver. His scalp grows tight to his skull, and his hair is dyed until it's perfectly dead, like a piece of black cloth. Kavanaugh ran his fingers through his own neatly trimmed thatch, and seemed to forget where he was for a moment. I had a twin brother, Brian, who died when we were 16. I have a photograph of him on my wall, an enlargement from a Kodak of him doing a high jump, rather good thing, full of action. It seemed to annoy the old gentleman. He kept looking at it and lifting his eyebrows, and finally he got up, tiptoed across the room, and turned the picture to the wall. "Poor Brian. Fine fellow, but died young," says he. Next morning there was the picture, still reversed. "Did he stay long?" Eastman asked, interestedly. "Half an hour by the clock." "Did he talk?" "Well, he rambled." "What about?" Kavanaugh rubbed his pale eyebrows before answering. About things that an old man ought to want to forget. His conversation is highly objectionable. Of course he knows me like a book, everything I've ever done or thought, but when he recalls them, he throws a bad light on them somehow. Things that weren't much off color look rotten. He doesn't leave one a shred of respect. He really doesn't. That's the amount of it. The young man whipped out his handkerchief and wiped his face. "You mean he really talks about things that none of your friends know?" "Oh dear, yes. Recalls things that happened in school. Anything disagreeable. Funny thing, he always turns Brian's picture to the wall." "Does he come often?" "Yes, oftener now. Of course I don't know how he gets in downstairs. The hall boys never see him. But he has a key to my door. I don't know how he got it, but I can hear him turn it in the lock." "Why don't you keep your driver with you, or telephone for me to come down?" "He'd only grin and go down the fire escape as he did before. He's often done it when Harry's come in suddenly. Everybody has to be alone sometimes, you know. Besides, I don't want anybody to see him. He has me there." "But why not? Why do you feel responsible for him?" Kavanaugh smiled wearily. "That's rather the point, isn't it? Why do I? But I absolutely do. That identifies him more than his knowing all about my life and my affairs." Eastman looked at Kavanaugh thoughtfully. "Well, I should advise you to go for something altogether different and new, and go in for it hard. Business, engineering, metallurgy, something this old fellow wouldn't be interested in. See if you can make him remember logarithms." Kavanaugh sighed. "No, he has me there, too. People never really change. They go on being themselves. But I would never make much trouble. Why can't they leave me alone? Damn it. I'd never hurt anybody except, perhaps, except your old gentleman, eh?" Eastman laughed. "Seriously, Kavanaugh, if you want to shake him, I think a year on a ranch would do it. He would never be coaxed far from his favorite haunts. He would dread Montana." Kavanaugh pursed up his lips. "So do I." "Oh, you think you do. Try it, and you'll find out. A gun and a horse beats all this sort of thing. Besides losing your haunt, you'd be putting 10 years in the bank for yourself. I know a good ranch where they take people if you want to try it." "Thank you. I'll consider. Do you think I'm batty?" "No, but I think you've been doing one sort of thing too long. You need big horizons. Get out of this." Kavanaugh smiled meekly. He rose lazily and yawned behind his hand. "It's late and I've taken your whole evening." He strolled over to the window and looked out. Queer place, New York. Rough on the little fellows. Don't you feel sorry for them, the girls especially? I do. What a fight they put up for a little fun. Why, even that old goat is sorry for them, the only decent thing he kept. Eastman followed him to the door and stood in the hall while Kavanaugh waited for the elevator. When the car came up, Kavanaugh extended his pink warm hand. "Good night." The cage sank and his rosy countenance disappeared, his round-eyed smile being the last thing to go. Weeks passed before Eastman saw Kavanaugh again. One morning, just as he was starting for Washington to argue a case before the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh telephoned him in his office to ask him about the Montana ranch he had recommended. Said he meant to take his advice and go out there for the spring and summer. When Eastman got back from Washington, he saw dusty trunks just out from the trunk room before Kavanaugh's door. Next morning, when he stopped to see what the young man was about, he found Kavanaugh in his shirt sleeves packing. "I'm really going. Off tomorrow night. You didn't think it of me, did you?" he asked gaily. "Oh, I've always had hopes of you," Eastman declared. "But you are in a hurry, it seems to me." "Yes, I am in a hurry." Kavanaugh shot a pair of leggings into one of the open trunks. "I telegraphed your ranch people, used your name, and they said it would be all right. By the way, some of my crowd are giving a little dinner for me at Rector's tonight. Couldn't you be persuaded, as it's a farewell occasion?" Kavanaugh looked at him hopefully. Eastman laughed and shook his head. "Sorry, Kavanaugh, but that's too gay a world for me. I've got too much work lined up before me. I wish I had time to stop and look at your guns, though. You seem to know something about guns. You've more than you'll need, but nobody can have too many good ones." He put down one of the revolvers regretfully. "I'll drop in to see you in the morning, if you're up." "I shall be up all right." "I've warned my crowd that I'll cut away before midnight." "You won't, though," Eastman called back over his shoulder as he hurried downstairs. The next morning, while Eastman was dressing, Rollins came in greatly excited. "I'm a little late, sir. I was stopped by Harry, Mr. Kavanaugh's driver. Mr. Kavanaugh shot himself last night, sir." Eastman dropped his vest and sat down on his shoebox. "You're drunk, Rollins," he shouted. "He's going away today." "Yes, sir. Harry found him this morning. He's quite dead, sir. Harry's telephoned for the coroner. Harry don't know what to do with the ticket." Eastman pulled on his coat and ran down the stairway. Kavanaugh's trunks were strapped and piled before the door. Harry was walking up and down the hall with a long green railroad ticket in his hand and a look of complete stupidity on his face. "What shall I do about this ticket, Mr. Eastman?" he whispered. "And what about his trunks? He had me tell the transfer people to come early. They may be here any minute. Yes, sir, I brought him home in the car last night before 12, as cheerful as could be." "Be quiet, Harry. Where is he?" "In his bed, sir." Eastman went into Kavanaugh's sleeping room. When he came back to the sitting room, he folded over the writing table, railway folders, timetables, receipted bills, nothing else. He looked up for the photograph of Kavanaugh's twin brother. There it was, turned to the wall. Eastman took it down and looked at it. A boy in track clothes, half lying in the chair, going over the string, shoulders first, above the heads of a crowd of lads who were running and cheering. The face was somewhat blurred by the motion and the bright sunlight. Eastman put the picture back as he found it. Had Kavanaugh entertained his visitor last night, and had the old man been more convincing than usual? Well, at any rate, he's seen to it that the old man can't establish identity. What a soft lot they are, fellows like poor Kavanaugh. Eastman thought of his office as a delightful place.
The Case of Lady Sannox by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The relations between Douglas Stone and the notorious Lady Sannox were very well known both among the fashionable circles of which she was a brilliant member and the scientific bodies which numbered him among their most illustrious conferers. There was naturally, therefore, a very widespread interest when it was announced one morning that the lady had absolutely and forever taken the veil, and that the world would see her no more. When, at the very tail of this rumor, there came the assurance that the celebrated operating surgeon, the man of steel nerves, had been found in the morning by his valet, seated on one side of his bed, smiling pleasantly upon the universe with both legs jammed into one side of his breeches, and his great brain about as valuable as a capful of porridge, the matter was strong enough to give quite a little thrill of interest to folk who had never hoped that their jaded nerves were capable of such a sensation. Douglas Stone in his prime was one of the most remarkable men in England. Indeed, he could hardly be said to have ever reached his prime, for he was but 39 at the time of this little incident. Those who knew him best were aware that, famous as he was as a surgeon, he might have succeeded with even greater rapidity in any of a dozen lines of life. He could have cut his way to fame as a soldier, struggled to it as an explorer, bullied for it in the courts, or built it out of stone and iron as an engineer. He was born to be great, for he could plan what another man dare not do, and he could do what another man dare not plan. In surgery none could follow him. His nerve, his judgment, his intuition were things apart. Again and again his knife cut away death, but grazed the very springs of life in doing it, until his assistants were as white as the patient. His energy, his audacity, His full-blooded self-confidence does not the memory of them still linger to the south of Marylebone Road and the north of Oxford Street. His vices were as magnificent as his virtues, and infinitely more picturesque. Large as was his income, and it was the third largest of all professional men in London, it was far beneath the luxury of his living. Deep in his complex nature lay a rich vein of sensualism at the sport of which he placed all the prizes of his life. The eye, the ear, the touch, the palate, all were his masters. The bouquet of old vintages, the scent of rare exotics, the curves and tints of the daintiest potteries of Europe, it was to these that the quick-running stream of gold was transformed. And then there came his sudden mad passion for Lady Sannox, when a single interview with 2 challenging glances and a whispered word set him ablaze. She was the loveliest woman in London, and the only one to him. He was one of the handsomest men in London, but not the only one to her. She had a liking for new experiences and was gracious to most men who wooed her. It may have been cause or it may have been effect that Lord Sannox looked 50, though he was but 36. He was a quiet, silent, neutral-tinted man, this lord, with thin lips and heavy eyelids, much given to gardening and full of home-like habits. He had at one time been fond of acting, had even rented a theatre in London, and on its boards had first seen Miss Marian Dawson, to whom he had offered his hand, his title, and a third of a county. Since his marriage, his early hobby had become distasteful to him. Even in private theatricals it was no longer possible to persuade him to exercise the talent which he had often showed that he possessed. He was happier with a spud and a watering can among his orchids and chrysanthemums. It was quite an interesting problem, whether he was absolutely devoid of sense, or miserably wanting in esprit. Did he know his lady's ways and condone them, or was he a mere blind doting fool? It was a point to be discussed over the teacups in snug little drawing-rooms, or with the aid of a cigar in the bow-windows of clubs. Bitter and plain were the comments among men upon his conduct. There was but one who had a good word to say for him, and he was the most silent member in the smoking-room. He had seen him break in a horse at the university, and it seemed to have left an impression upon his mind. But when Douglas Stone became the favourite, all doubts as to Lord Sannox's knowledge or ignorance were set forever at rest. There was no subterfuge about Stone. In his high-handed, impetuous fashion, he set all caution and discretion at defiance. The scandal became notorious. A learned body intimated that his name had been struck from the list of its vice-presidents. 2 friends implored him to consider his professional credit. He cursed them all 3 and spent 40 guineas on a bangle to take with him to the lady. He was at her house every evening, and she drove in his carriage in the afternoons. There was not an attempt on either side to conceal their relations, but there came at last a little incident to interrupt them. It was a dismal winter's night, very cold and gusty, with the wind whooping in the chimneys and blustering against the window panes. A thin spatter of rain tinkled on the glass with each fresh sough of the gale, drowning for the instant the dull gurgle and drip from the eaves. Douglas Stone had finished his dinner, and sat by his fire in the study, a glass of rich port upon the malachite table at his elbow. As he raised it to his lips, he held it up against the lamplight, and watched with the eye of a connoisseur the tiny scales of beeswing which floated in its rich ruby depths. The fire, as it spurted up, threw fitful lights upon his bold, clear-cut face, with its widely opened grey eyes, its thick and yet firm lips, and the deep square jaw which had something Roman in its strength and its animalism. He smiled from time to time as he nestled back in his luxurious chair. Indeed, he had a right to feel well pleased, for, against the advice of 6 colleagues, he had performed an operation that day of which only 2 cases were on record, and the result had been brilliant beyond all expectation. No other man in London would have had the daring to plan, or the skill to execute such a heroic measure. But he had promised Lady Sannox to see her that evening, and it was already 8:30. His hand was outstretched to the bell to order the carriage when he heard the dull thud of the knocker. An instant later, there was the shuffling of feet in the hall and the sharp closing of a door. "A patient to see you, sir, in the consulting room," said the butler. "About himself?" "No, sir. I think he wants you to go out." "It is too late," cried Douglas Stone peevishly. "I won't go." "This is his card, sir." The butler presented it upon the gold salver which had been given to his master by the wife of a prime minister. "Hamil Ali, Smyrna. The fellow is a Turk, I suppose." "Yes, sir. He seems as if he came from abroad, sir, and he's in a terrible way." "I have an engagement. I must go somewhere else, but I'll see him, show him in here, Pym." A few moments later, the butler swung open the door and ushered in a small and decrepit man, who walked with a bent back and with a forward push of the face, and blink of the eyes which goes with extreme short sight. His face was swarthy, and his hair and beard of the deepest black. In one hand he held a turban of white muslin striped with red, in the other a small chamois leather bag. "Good evening," said Douglas Stone when the butler had closed the door. "You speak English, I presume?" "Yes, sir. I'm from Asia Minor, but I speak English when I speak slow." "You wanted me to go out, I understand?" "Yes, sir. I wanted very much that you should see my wife." "I could come in the morning, but I have an engagement which prevents me from seeing your wife tonight." The Turk's answer was a singular one. He pulled the string which closed the mouth of the chamois leather bag, and poured a flood of gold onto the table. "There are £100 there," said he, "and I promise you that it will not take you an hour. I have a cab ready at the door." Douglas Stone glanced at his watch. An hour would not make it too late to visit Lady Sannox. He had been there later, and the fee was an extraordinarily high one. He had been pressed by his creditors lately, and he could not afford to let such a chance pass. He would go. "What is the case?" he asked. "Oh, it is so sad a one, so sad a one. You have not perhaps heard of the daggers of the Almohades?" "Never." "Ah, they're Eastern daggers of great age and of a singular shape, with the hilt like what you call a stirrup. I am a curiosity dealer, you understand, and that is why I've come to England from Smyrna. But next week I go back once more. Many things I brought with me, and I have a few things left, but among them to my sorrow is one of these daggers." "You will remember that I have an appointment, sir," said the surgeon with some irritation. "Pray confine yourself to the necessary details." "You will see that is necessary. Today my wife fell down in a faint in the room in which I keep my wares, and she cut her lower lip upon this cursed dagger of Almohades." "I see," said Douglas Stone, rising. "And you wish me to dress the wound?" "No, no, it is worse than that." "What then?" "These daggers are poisoned." "Poisoned?" "Yes, and there is no man, east or west, who can tell now what is the poison or what is the cure. But all that is known I know, for my father was in this strait before me, and we have had much to do with these poisoned weapons." "What are the symptoms?" "Deep sleep, and death in 30 hours. "And you say there is no cure. Why then should you pay me this considerable fee?" "No drug can cure, but the knife may." "And how?" "The poison is slow of absorption. It remains for hours in the wound." "Washing then might cleanse it?" "No more than in a snake bite. It is too subtle and too deadly." "Excision of the wound then?" "That is it. If it be on the finger, take the finger off. So said my father always. But think of where this wound is, and that it is my wife. It is dreadful." But familiarity with such grim matters may take the finer edge from a man's sympathy. To Douglas Stone this was already an interesting case, and he brushed aside as irrelevant the feeble objections of the husband. "It appears to be that or nothing," said he brusquely. "It is better to lose a lip than a life." "Ah, yes, I know that you are right. Well, well, it is kismet and it must be faced. I have the cab and you will come with me and do this thing." Douglas Stone took his case of bistouries from a drawer, and placed it with a roll of bandage and a compress of lint in his pocket. He must waste no more time if he were to see Lady Sannox. "I am ready," said he, pulling on his overcoat. "Will you take a glass of wine before you go out into this cold air?" His visitor shrank away with a protesting hand upraised. "You forget that I am a Mussulman and a true follower of the Prophet," said he. "But tell me, what is the bottle of green glass which you have placed in your pocket?" "It is chloroform." "Ah, that also is forbidden to us. It is a spirit and we make no use of such things." "What? You would allow your wife to go through an operation without an anesthetic?" "Ah, she'll feel nothing, poor soul. The deep sleep has already come on, which is the first working of the poison. And then I've given her our Smyrna opium. Come, sir, for already an hour has passed." As they stepped out into the darkness, a sheet of rain was driven in upon their faces, and the whole lamp which dangled from the arm of a marble caryatid went out with a fluff. Pym the butler pushed the heavy door to, straining hard with his shoulder against the wind, while the two men groped their way towards the yellow glare which showed where the cab was waiting. An instant later, they were rattling upon their journey. "Is it far?" asked Douglas Stone. "Oh, no. We have a very little quiet place off the Euston Road." The sergeant pressed the spring of his repeater, and listened to the little things which told him the hour. It was 9:15. He calculated the distances, and the short time which it would take him to perform so trivial an operation. He ought to reach Lady Sannox by 10 o'clock. Through the fogged windows, he saw the blared gas lamps dancing past, with occasionally the broader glare of a shop front. The rain was pelting and rattling upon the leathern top of the carriage, and the wheels swashed as they rolled through puddle and mud. Opposite to him, the white headgear of his companion gleamed faintly through the obscurity. The sergeant felt in his pockets and arranged his needles, his ligatures and his safety pins, that no time might be wasted when they arrived. He chafed with impatience and drummed his foot upon the floor, but the cab slowed down at last and pulled up. In an instant, Douglas Stone was out and the Smyrna merchant's store was at his very heel. "You can wait," said he to the driver. It was a mean-looking house in a narrow and sordid street. The sergeant, who knew his London well, cast a swift glance into the shadows, but there was nothing distinctive, no shop, no movement, nothing but a double line of dull flat-faced houses, a double stretch of wet flagstones which gleamed in the lamplight, and a double rush of water in the gutters which swirled and gurgled towards the sewer gratings. The door which faced them was blotched and discoloured, and a faint light in the fan pane above it served to show the dust and the grime which covered it. Above, in one of the bedroom windows, there was a dull yellow glimmer. The merchant knocked loudly, and as he turned his dark face towards the light, Douglas Stone could see that it was contracted with anxiety. A bolt was drawn, and an elderly woman with a taper stood in the doorway, shielding the thin flame with her gnarled hand. "Is all well?" gasped the merchant. "She is as you left her, sir." "She has not spoken?" "No, she is in a deep sleep." The merchant closed the door, and Douglas Stone walked down the narrow passage, glancing about him in some surprise as he did so. There was no oilcloth, no mat, no hat-rack. Deep grey dust and heavy festoons of cobwebs met his eyes everywhere. Following the old woman up the winding stair, his firm footfall echoed harshly through the silent house. There was no carpet. The bedroom was on the second landing. Douglas Stone followed the old nurse into it, with the merchant at his heels. Here, at least, there was furniture and to spare. The floor was littered and the corners piled with Turkish cabinets, inlaid tables, coats of chainmail, strange pipes and grotesque weapons. A single small lamp stood up on a bracket on the wall. Douglas Stone took it down and, picking his way among the lumber, walked over to a couch in the corner, on which lay a woman dressed in the Turkish fashion with yashmak and veil. The lower part of the face was exposed, and the sergeant saw a jagged cut which zigzagged along the border of the underlip. "You will forgive the yashmak," said the Turk. "You know our views about women in the East." But the sergeant was not thinking about the yashmak. This was no longer a woman to him, it was a case. He stooped and examined the wound carefully. "There are no signs of irritation," said he. "We might delay the operation until local symptoms develop." The husband wrung his hands in uncontrollable agitation. "Oh, sir, sir," he cried, "do not trifle, you don't know. It is deadly. I know, and I give you my assurance that an operation is absolutely necessary. Only the knife can save her." "And yet I am inclined to wait," said Douglas Stone. "That is enough," the Turk cried angrily. "Every minute is of importance, and I cannot stand here and see my wife allowed to sink. It only remains for me to give you my thanks for having come, and to call in some other surgeons before it is too late." Douglas Stone hesitated. To refund that £100 was no pleasant matter, but of course if he left the case he must return the money. And if the Turk were right and the woman died, his position before a coroner might be an embarrassing one. "You have had personal experience of this poison?" he asked. "I have." "And you assure me that an operation is needful?" "I swear it by all that I hold sacred." "The disfigurement will be frightful. I can understand that the mouth will not be a pretty one to kiss." Douglas Stone turned fiercely upon the man. The speech was a brutal one, but the Turk has his own fashion of talk and of thought, and there was no time for wrangling. Douglas Stone drew a bisturi from his case, opened it and felt the keen straight edge with his forefinger. Then he held the lamp closer to the bed. Two dark eyes were gazing up at him through the slit in the yashmak. They were all iris, and the pupil was hardly to be seen. "You have given her a very heavy dose of opium." "Yes, she has had a good dose." He glanced again at the dark eyes, which looked straight at his own. They were dull and lustreless, but even as he gazed, a little shifting sparkle came into them and the lips quivered. "She is not absolutely unconscious," said he. "Would it not be well to use the knife, while it will be painless?" The same thought had crossed the surgeon's mind. He grasped the wounded lip with his forceps, and with two swift cuts he took out a broad V-shaped piece. The woman sprang upon the couch with a dreadful gurgling scream. Her covering was torn from her face. It was a face that he knew. In spite of that protruding upper lip and that slobber of blood, it was a face that he knew. She kept on putting her hand up to the gap and screaming. Douglas Stone sat down at the foot of the couch with his knife and his forceps. The room was whirling round, and he had felt something go like a ripping seam behind his ear. A bystander would have said that his face was the more ghastly of the two. As in a dream, or as if he had been looking at something at the play, he was conscious that the Turk's hair and beard lay upon the table, and that Lord Sannox was leaning against the wall with his hand to his side, laughing silently. The screams had died away now, and the dreadful head had dropped back again upon the pillow, but Douglas Stone still sat motionless, and Lord Sannox still chuckled quietly to himself. "It was really very necessary for Marian, this operation," said he. "Not physically, but morally, you know, morally." Douglas Stone stooped for yards and began to play with the fringe of the coverlet. His knife tinkled down upon the ground, but he still held the forceps and something more. "I had long intended to make a little example," said Lord Sannox suavely. "Your note of Wednesday miscarried, and I have it here in my pocket-book. I took some pains in carrying out my idea. The wound, by the way, was from nothing more dangerous than my signet ring." He glanced keenly at his silent companion, and cocked the small revolver which he held in his coat pocket. But Douglas Stone was still picking at the coverlet. "You see you have kept your appointment after all," said Lord Sannox. And at that, Douglas Stone began to laugh. He laughed long and loudly, but Lord Sannox did not laugh now. Something like fear sharpened and hardened his features. He walked from the room, and he walked on tiptoe. The old woman was waiting outside. "Attend to your mistress when she wakes," said Lord Sannox. Then he went down to the street. The cab was at the door, and the driver raised his hand to his hat. "John," said Lord Sannox, "you'll take the doctor home first. He'll want leading downstairs, I think. Tell his butler that he has been taken ill at a case." "Very good, sir." "Then you can take Lady Sannox home." "And how about yourself, sir?" "Oh, my address for the next few months will be Hotel di Roma, Venice. Just see that the letters are sent on. And tell Stevens to exhibit all the purple chrysanthemums next Monday and to wire me the result."